Welcome back, boys and girls. As you can tell, today we're going to talk about bullying. And before you turn this off, it's not just going to be about bullying as you know it in the political correctness of today. We're going to talk about helping people understand who feel like they're being bullied, that there's just going to be people out there that don't like them. Hopefully going to shine some light on folks that do bully, including people we actually pay from the Army Corps of PsyOps. We're going to talk about people who passively aggressively bully and people who create true hate crime bullying, right? The internet has made the world smaller. When I was a little kid, I grew up in, as I say, a little town in Kansas. And, I did get to Massachusetts at one point and saw big cities, and my parents did take me around to travel once a year usually so I could see other states in the Union. It wasn't uncommon for me to stay in my little hometown for 6 months. It's like a 5-mile square town. And that, created this, haven for me to be in. It's almost like a Twilight Zone town where everything is sort of cool and beautiful and relaxed and chill, and you can just live in that town and you can boil up a bunch of wisdom out of the different people that you can see and that sort of thing. But what it allowed me to do was to be in a microcosm of opinions that were easy to track. There were so few people that had differing opinions. I got to see how they formed their differing opinions and how they dealt with them. So on the internet today, it is a haven for bullying, no matter how you look at it, no matter how intellectual a person replying is or how idiotic you think they might be. It's one of these things of, I imagine that some of the stupidest comments that I read and I believe are a 12-year-old. In the back of my brain, I'm thinking, no, this is probably a Harvard graduate sitting on top of some skyscraper in his palatial office making $100 million a year behaving that way in a chat. I don't know why I get that feeling, but I feel like everyone hides these differences and the need to express that difference, and because we've made it a crime to merely utter the words of how you feel when it's different than everyone else. I think a lot of people are retreating into the internet to figure out a way to exhaust this whole thing. I've mentioned a couple times in the first 50 episodes that I believe that the comedian Richard Pryor played a much bigger role in society than anyone really gives him credit for or on the surface notices. I was not raised with the knowledge or the understanding / opinion that I'm about to give you. It simply occurred to me over time when he vanished off of the stage and was replaced. I felt like we lost something very special because I watched society get tight again. And I'll just tell you, there was a famous show of his. I think it was in Long Beach over here in California, I believe. He's wearing a red shirt and black pants. There was one live on the Sunset Strip where he's wearing a red suit with black shirt. It's kind of the inverse. But it's one of his earlier bits, and I was raised on that particular show. Red shirt, black slacks. And what Richard did was he took charge of the differences that he understood in society. Now, he made fun of everything, right? But he definitely put a good portion of his routine into racial differences. Both the goofy, stupid ones and the ones that are more painful. And he figured out a way to get us to see the different worlds without saying it in a way that would offend other people. And I'll give you an example. He has a few routines about when he grew up and how, Richard Pryor grew up in a time when he had to actually sip from the black fountain, water fountain. He had to go in the back of a restaurant. He couldn't go where white people were. It was, pre-segregation or he was living during segregation and pre-civil rights movement out of the 60s, right? So he was very familiar with what that was like. He was very familiar, according to his own words, cowering down to Whitey to get a job, to be able to go on stage, to perform. It's sort of like post-slavery days where you didn't have to necessarily be a slave, but you had to behave like one. I think most Americans, or anybody, sorry, I don't mean to say Americans, but most people would realize that after several hundred years of being slaves, of being repressed and brought over here by the Spanish and dropped off here, you have a society that's had its culture ripped out. It's been crossbred quite a bit with the masters. And you have a lack of education because they're not allowed to be educated up to a certain point. And then at some point it flips over and they're able to get educated, but they don't know where to go. I mean, they're just kind of a lost people. And Richard wanted to make sure that people understood what it was like to grow up black in America during these pre-civil rights eras. And, it takes time to repair once things get fixed mentally a little bit, or at least the rights in the government allow people to be treated equal. It takes several decades, if not hundreds of years, to balance back out, right? But he would tell stories about... I think one of his bits is about going over. It was at a funeral, and he said, when you go to a funeral, there's a wake where everyone gets together, and maybe observes the body or what have you. But he said that one of his aunts would serve almonds, and he goes, he's thumbing through his almonds, and he's like, "Hey, Mom," he goes, "My almonds have legs on them," He's talking about the roaches, right? Well, in the back of your brain. Part of it's a humor about his aunt being so old she can't see anymore, and his mother actually was like, she's just old, she can't see him anymore, don't say anything. The other side would be the average cleanliness of the home that his aunt could get would be substandard, right? He found ways of saying this stuff so that we could hear it, so we could sympathize with it, so we could feel the pain of being in that situation without someone coming up on stage and saying, "You white folks are bad. Look what you did to us." Mine, has so many roaches in her house she doesn't even know which ones are almonds. He found beautiful ways of doing this constantly. I think he starts off the bit about the fact that as everyone's piling into the theater, he goes, "This is really funny." He goes, "This is the time that white people find out that black people have taken their seats." And he does this impersonation of a white guy, getting all upset about those seats being taken by the black people. And in fact that these guys, he's in a black neighborhood, so he's like, "You're never going to get these guys out of your seats. You should have come on time," Anyway, I mention that because we don't have relief valves anymore like we used to, in my opinion. If we do, I'm missing it. Right? Kyle and I have mentioned on this show several times. There's a movie out there called Blazing Saddles. Mel Brooks' finest creation. It's about 1975, 76. It might be one of the funniest comedies I've ever seen. However, it's a generational comedy. What's that mean? That means if you were born, you're my daughter's age, and you're in college, you'll look at it and you may not understand what you're looking at. And you're going to hear a bunch of racist comments, and you may not understand that Richard Pryor, he wrote the white lines, and the white guys wrote the black lines, And they try to balance out the creation algorithm of making this film. And it's all about a black guy who's been appointed as a sheriff in an all-white town in the 1800s because they're trying to make the town so angry that they kill the sheriff, and they end up loving the sheriff. And so they bring out all these racial differences. And, of course, they started off where everyone's super racist, can't believe they've been given a black sheriff. And, of course, they're idiotic because they believe that sort of thing. And once the black guy, shows that he's smart, he's debonair, and he's got a plan, he saves their ass. And they don't want him to leave at the end of the film. And, of course, just in a romantic way, he leaves with his sidekick, Gene Wilder's character, the Cisco Kid. Pretty sure they call him Cisco Kid. There's that war song, Cisco Kid. It always makes me wonder if I'm saying it wrong. Anyway, those films helped exhaust the differences that we have. But now we have a political correctness layer on top of us, which is making it, I have a whole episode on Thought Police, which I'm going to try not to cross over into the Thought Police, but there's definitely going to be a few elements from the Thought Police episode in this episode. But we have laws that protect behavior in this world. And I think it's interesting that once something is done online, there's very little accountability online. But when you do it in person, you can get arrested, or you can have at least some charges put on you, or at least get a cop to talk to you. For instance, there's three forms of someone being aggressive towards you, and I hope I have these correct. I was always taught that assault is more of a verbal communication. It's a verbal threat that crosses lines. It's a verbal threat of intent to hurt you. You can also say assault is just someone being very rude to you. If you say F you to a cop, he can file assault charges, as I understand it. Once it goes to blows, once someone starts touching you, punching you, you have battery. And that's where you have assault and battery charges. Someone threatened to hurt you and did hurt you, right? And then you have murder, right? Or, maybe there's attempted murder somewhere in there, but someone's trying to kill you. It's an extreme result of battery. Those three categories of law exist, I think, in every remotely civilized area on this planet. And I think that the internet started out in the 90s, and people were actually threatening. It's all assault in the forums out there. When someone have an opinion about something and people differ in their opinions, you would have someone threatening someone, and nothing could be done. We couldn't find people. Now with surveillance, your IP address will definitely, identify where you were in the world, what time of day you did what you did, and they'll find you. So in one sense, the ultimate is protected. There are laws on the books today if we simply enforce them. We don't need to worry about how hot it gets up to that point from some perspectives, because as soon as it traverses into assault, that battery is the next level, and some sort of physical end product of maybe murder might be the next product, although it gets rarer and rarer the more that you escalate the system up. A lot of people assault each other all the time. Very few people from the assault category go up into battery and actually physically go to blows. From the people that physically go to blows, fewer and fewer of those actually commit capital murder, capital crime. I think it's like 45 degrees out here, although it is warming up. So why would there be a concern about this entire thing? Why make an episode on bullying? Most of you know. I'll say this much. If you have free thought, meaning you could think for yourself and you can look at things from both sides of an angle, both what you're told to believe and then what you maybe derive to believe based on your observation or experience, then you're sort of a lethal weapon to anyone who wants to manipulate society. It's sort of like, I'll give you a really crazy analogy. You're cleaning out your barbecue and you're using a plastic bag to do it because all the coals, as you remember them, well, they're all cold. They haven't lit in your grill for a week. And you scoop them all up into that plastic bag, and you're going to use the bag to get rid of all the coal. But one of them is red hot somehow, and it's burning through all the other coals, and it hits the edge of the bag and it goes out. And you lost control of all that cleanup. Think of the plastic bag as sort of the mind control of forces that come on from on high to get us to behave in more of a fascist, subservient world. This whole thing about getting rid of our guns. They're trying to sway the opinion of us to get rid of our weapons because the banks and the families that own the banks have a horrific totalitarian world for us once that happens. There will not be a utopia on the other side of that equation. Like I said in the war episode, we look at how they treat war heroes, right? People who've gone to war and been injured doing what they're told to do. And they're not taken care of at all. So we can't assume that they're going to treat the bottom of the pyramid better than they treat the middle of the pyramid. Bullying is the byproduct of a bunch of political correctness. And you all know that, right? Someone's telling you, you can't believe this, you can't believe that. You can't disagree with me, and you can't dislike me. You can't dislike that thing over there because I like it. And if you do, just keep it deep down inside. And like I said in the Thought Police episode, the mechanism is extremely dangerous because it gets us to double speak our own brains. Now, what was it like in the past, right? What was it like in the past? We had people that lived in various geographical areas that were different, and they were extremely different people, and no one saw those other groups. And they didn't have to interact with each other, sort of what I should really say. And they were able to exist totally different than another group because they didn't know about the other group. Ignorance is bliss, right? And it's interesting how these individuals could grow up, live their bigoted lives, and die, and it didn't matter. All right. So what's changed? Oh, right, the internet. The internet came around, and it became a lot of things. And I think we need to see it for its multidimensional effect that it's had on society. Marshall McLuhan said, it's not so much the information that's piped through a medium, it's the medium itself that will create a different perspective inside the mind of man. And if you think about the fact that we form neural nets in our brains based on what we learn and the opinions and the thought processes that we have, right? The internet is shaping the mind of man. It's shaping the electrical synapse structures in our brains, the more that we engage its formula of bringing us information. I was listening to a young girl yesterday. I was eating lunch, and next to me was this young girl talking to her other friend, and they're probably early 20s, late teens, and they were talking about the fact that she didn't want to have a Facebook. I almost wanted to interject and go, good girl, But she said, I only have one because my mom set it up, and she said, my friends all ask me why it takes me so long to respond. And she goes, I just hate Facebook. Is that good enough for you? Back in the day, 40 years ago, let's put it that way. We're in the 70s, right? 1975 on average, right? People knew that there were people different than them all around the world. And we used to buy National Geographic books to look at their worlds. And it used to be painted in a fairly decent light. But there was one commodity out there that was, and there's multiple, right? But there's one commodity out there that these people who make money off of information realized: the news. I remember when I was a kid, I used to watch these news reports come in the 70s. Here I am living a beautiful life in Kansas. I'm living in the country. It's just a happy time in America. Vietnam War is over. Everything's bumping. My little hometown probably swelled up to 12,000, 13,000 people, which is the biggest population it's ever had. Mom and dad are making money. Mom and dad are happy. I think mom was a stay-at-home mom up till I was about 8. But we lived in our own little microcosm. We didn't hurt anybody, and everybody was happy. But I remember watching the news one day, and they talked about how these guerrilla factions had fought some other faction. And I remember seeing the first really gruesome images on the news. It's burned in my mind right now. And by the way, when I was a kid, I thought it actually was gorillas, like big monkeys. But they showed a gurney, a body on the gurney, and then a white sheet over that, and it was all soaked through with blood. This is red as exorcism stuff, right? And I was like, oh my God, what the hell happened here? Of course, I'm thinking it's monkeys that hurt somebody. But regardless, I thought something horrible is going on. Had I understood as a child that was a actual military faction made of human beings attacking other people, it would have been more terrifying for me. But my parents, who were young in their 20s, were seeing this and essentially being freaked out all of a sudden. When they realized that they could broadcast into your brain fear, then they could get you to do things, because people just like sheep, right? The little bark of the sheepdog gets everything to run in one direction. You can just yell, "Kya," and they'll all go in a particular direction. It's crazy how easily manipulated we are today. So that's the extreme one, the war-based one that you all know of. But now we know that there is sort of this, if you can convince the majority of sheep, of mouth-breathing, deer-eyed sheep, to believe any one theory, regardless if it's decent theory or a bad theory, science-based, fiction-based, agenda-based, You then start to apply so much pressure onto the intellectuals in the world that you get them to cower down and cave in. And in history, this has been the basis of every major loss in humanity. You know, the Nazis rose up and were able to do what they did, and no one fought them back until they got so powerful no one could fight them back without, three nations coming together to pound them with an underground, sabotaging them. But that's the big version that you remember, that you understand. And I think now we're all starting to feel the subatomic version of it, which is this anti-bullying thing, which has kind of gone off its tracks. Now, nobody wants anyone to be bullied, right? And bullies typically, again, I'll just tell anyone who's being bullied, they bully from a position of cowardice. They're projecting their fears, right? Every office that I've ever known about where someone is sitting in a position in a cube or sitting somewhere and they're constantly talking about how everyone else isn't doing their job and how amazing they are doing their job. My experience, 9 times out of 10, that's the person that is actually failing at doing their job, or at least fearing that they're not doing their job well, and they're projecting out, right? Then you have individuals that are different than everyone else. Your gay and lesbian community in the world obviously has a hard time dealing with the rest of the world who either has a religious belief that it's against God for 2 men to be together, 2 women to be together, or you simply just have the genetic trigger in you saying, look, the human body was made one way, and it's not actually true because we have hermaphrodites and different things, but from the purest standpoint, they think, okay, there's an innie and there's an outie and they happen to go together and you can't procreate without that mechanism occurring. Obviously, I think even homosexuals would agree that that's what's going on here. Now, who knows why someone's orientation might be different? Might happen genetically, might happen mentally. For this conversation, it simply doesn't matter. In my experience, anyone who's made that orientation change, it's happened usually extremely early in their life, and there's no changing it. So why try? Why even get frustrated about it, right? If a person's a good person, they're a good person. If they're an asshole, they're an asshole. Now, in some cases, people get angry at the way society treats them, so you might actually have someone, and I've bumped into when I lived in the Bay Area, where they're different than perhaps the majority of folks for various reasons, not just their orientation, and people treat them poorly because of it. And then they get cynical and angry, and they start to lash out. And then society as an overwhelming force, will treat them poorly more. And so it's this ancestral loop of folks that hate each other, I lived 12 years in the San Francisco area, but I grew up in the Midwest. And when you're in the Midwest, you're always taught that San Francisco is the homosexual haven of America. And I don't even know if that's true. But definitely there's distinct districts, the Castro Market District, and it's you would assume, right, that area of the world with a massive population of homosexuals would be very acclimated to it and very calm about it, even if you're straight. You're like, okay, well, I'm in a world where people like Greenwich Village, people in North Hollywood, it just is there, right? Okay. But let me tell you, man, the most... I will say, other than probably the Deep South, which I have not lived in, the amount of, I don't even know what you call it. It's not really hate crimes, but the amount of intolerance for homosexuality in the Bay Area is phenomenal. The amount of people that are they sound like they came right out of the South. And they're like, they say all the derogatory words about gays. Boom, 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 and how horrible they are, and it's against God and all this other stuff. And I'm sitting there looking at these people, and I'm thinking, man, I'm from the Midwest. I came out here, you're a traditional homophobe, right? And I just, I thought it was clever to make fun of folks who were different. It's just what I was raised. Wasn't raised with it from my parents. Never, ever said anything bad about homosexuals. I mean, even my father, who let us say, every dirty word in the book, he never pushed that forward, and I was never raised with that. But the kids I was raised with in my hometown, I definitely, you fall into it. It's just like this frequency of stupidity in the Midwest. And I think they've even calmed down tremendously, which is great. But I came to the West Coast, and I had a couple of embarrassing moments where I ran my mouth off. Probably one of the most embarrassing moments of my life is I ran my mouth off and said the F-bomb, which I think was faggot, in front of a very nice guy sitting right next to me I didn't know. And that was it. I was done. I didn't really feel like I should have said it, but I did say it to be funny. And it was... what was really strange was I was in a car, and Kenny G came on. As far as I know, Kenny G's a straight guy. But everyone in the car made fun of him, of how his music's just overly soft and just gross, and let's not play this music because we're all headed out to a nightclub. And I'm like, I don't know, 21 years old, I think. And I used the faggot word. And the guy next to me, who was hosting us the whole weekend at this beautiful beachside mansion in San Diego, he didn't care. He was an older guy. He'd heard it all. He realized I was just an idiot. But later that night, I figured out what I had done. I didn't have the temerity and the courage to apologize to him right then and there, but I was definitely treating him wonderful and stuff like that after that. But anyway, it was stupid of me. It was utterly ignorant of me to do that. Now, when I got to the Bay Area several years later, or actually very shortly after that, I had learned my lesson. Don't run your mouth to say stupid jokes at other people's expenses, and sort of all the racial jokes that I grew up with just boiled off, and no one was trying to hurt anybody with these jokes in the Midwest. It was always just, again, a way to blow off steam, right? But when I got to the Bay Area, I calmed down, and then I was noticing everybody who lived there, or not everybody, but a large portion of people, it was never any problem to find someone who had this bigotry towards homosexuality when they lived in, per capita, one of the largest and densest areas of such a thing. I couldn't understand it, right? So mixing doesn't always solve the problem. And when I finally moved back down to Southern California, I realized tolerance is back in the game, But the internet has utterly compressed all of the sectors of the world in our mind, right? We're still 8,000 miles away from the other side of the planet. Or further, we still don't have, a Middle Eastern country bordering America. But we behave in America like we do. We behave like America has been lifted off the map, lift to Eurasia, and drop right, move over all of the other Middle Eastern countries, and that we're completely surrounded by jihadists, and we're all going to die because of Al-Qaeda or ISIS. That's how we behave in this world. But we don't need to talk about those guys on this particular thing. Now, there's a natural process here, and that is that we have to shake out the opinions of man. It just is a process. Back in the day, it was, one village believed something different than another village, and they would just go to blows, and whoever won genocided the other faction, and that belief system, the arts and crafts and cultures of that society just disappeared off planet Earth. And I'm sure it's happened 10,000 times, if not 1,000,000 times in world history. It's starting over again on one level. And I think there's been tremendous progress for people on the internet. One thing I've seen, being in the video game business and being a specialist in multiplayer games and multiplayer platforms, where people went from literally the 90s of having a bunch of single-player experiences, or at least LAN network experiences where you actually come with your buddies inside a company and you play head-to-head or whatever. You're still with your friends, no big deal. But once we started crossing and connecting wires between anyone in the world, and they were able to play games, and then we added the chat feature so they could kind of taunt each other, right? We started seeing the juvenile nature of man's mind from around the world. And coming from the Midwest, I can smell a Midwestern kid. I can smell what age the kid is by how he talks. And I think World of Warcraft, which is one of the games that I played where you have to create a guild, and you'll have to get in the guild, and there's only certain fights you can play if you have a guild. And you would hear kids just talk like morons. And we'd be in the middle of a dungeon fight, and some kid would start talking, his homophobic stuff. A bunch of the faggot bombs would be dropped, and this and that and this, and then everyone's going, "What are you talking about? We're playing a game that's like a fantasy Dungeons and Dragons game based on the Warcraft franchise from Blizzard. What are you talking about with all these?" Like you are being surrounded by gay people all of a sudden, and you're having a meltdown, right? And it's usually a really young kid, white male in the Midwest, and usually around 12 is usually the age where you really just see a diary of the mouth of all their psychoses that they've been brought up with. They think that if anything goes wrong, this is what's funny. Anytime something went wrong in the fight on this virtual video game, whatever they were afraid of in the world is what they'd start talking about in the chat. A couple rare cases that were just odd, almost amazing things to watch. Was a kid would start if he was disagreeing with someone in the chat, because a kid might make a mistake, right? And everyone's trying to say, "Hey, kid, you're a mage, and you're responsible for this. You got to stand here, and then in phase 2, you got to stand over here, and phase 3, you got to stand here." And the kid would screw it up because he's young. But instead of just sucking it up like a little adult and going, "Okay, man, sorry, just tell me what I got to do," he would start, all this derogatory stuff. But then the guy would say, if someone would persist on him, not let him go, because there's always one guy that will just be like, "Just get out of here, just quit, just sign off, get out of the raid and let someone else get in who's a better player than you," which is also equally rude. But the kid would start saying, "I bet you're a race that I don't like, but you're a black guy, but you're whatever, you're whatever he's afraid of in the world." He starts projecting what his parents taught him and what his friends taught him, It's amazing how that works. I said an episode a while back about, because I'm trying to get the heart of why bullying exists, right? I said that, had some family members of mine move to Texas, and they were fairly sound mind when they were in Kansas, but as soon as they moved to Texas, and no slight against Texas, I don't know what the deal was, but both of them, I think, went into a heavy phase of self-loathing. And every time I talked to them, it was, how's life? And, if anything was remotely wrong in the world, they'd mention another race. This race is messing it up. Or, and I would say, well, okay, well, how's that possible? What are you talking about? Did you get mugged by somebody of a certain race? Oh, no, but I just look over there and they're just not working very hard. Remember that thing I told you? People who say other people aren't doing their job are usually the ones that aren't doing it. And they're trying to get you to look over there and not at them. And that's what I believe was going on, right? But bullying is always based on fear. The kids that get really, really tough physically, they want everyone to fear them. That's why they got tough. That's why they started lifting weights. LL Cool J was fairly straightforward in his book, his first autobiography, where he talked about the fact that when he was a kid, one of his stepfathers came in the room and shot his grandfather and his mother with a shotgun. I don't think either one of them died, and the other guy, I think he may have blown his brains out eventually, but he was only like 12 years old. He was unable to defend the situation. He may have been younger than that, but he was unable to defend because he was so young. So one of the reasons why he became behemoth was that he wanted to make sure that no one could ever do that to him again. And when someone broke in his house a couple of years ago, he beat the living shit out of him. Mike Tyson, same thing. Mike Tyson was very alienated as a child, was sent to foster homes, and just always was terrified of life. I think he's turned into actually a fairly amazing human being at this point in his life. And I know he's been accused of rape and all that stuff, but I think if there's one guy I've seen really reverse into a sweet being, it's that man, believe it or not. But he got huge and big and learned how to fight as a matter of his fear to survive. And then, of course, he was Custom Auto found him and made him a boxer. He became a world champion. And then everyone started screwing him because he was actually a good, tender soul. Don King ripped him off. I think Don King stole 95% of every penny he ever earned. And then he was cynical and angry, So that's the psychosis, of an individual turning into a bully. It's usually out of pure fear. Guys who get tattoos all over their bodies, some of them are artists, and they feel like they're putting on the outside of what they really are. Sometimes they tell stories of their of their historical experience. And other guys, usually softer guys, all right, they start putting the barbed wire in their arms, and they just want you, like George Carlin said, you want me to fear you because you have a barbed wire tattoo, and he goes, why don't you put the real barbed wire in your arm, and we'll see how tough you are. I think that was an interesting observation, right? But the internet lets us see things that we're afraid of if you're prone to be afraid of something, I think when you've experienced a lot of bullies in your lifetime, and I've had my share of them, man, moving around, having to, when you move around to different cities, you have to make friends. Well, the first people that gravitate to you when you move in from another area are those without friends. And those without friends who are indigenous to the area you're moving to usually have some problem. Now, it could be that if they're indigenous and they're coming at you, it could be that they just are odd. They're a nerd. They just have a stutter. They're just strange. And so they come at you because they just need a friend. And I've always been extremely good friends with everyone who's just a good person, always. But we had a situation in my hometown where I had just come to my hometown after leaving. So I grew up there for several years and left, went to Massachusetts, came back. I think I was about 8th grade, and they brought in this kid, and he was probably one of the most physically formidable kids. He was also new, and he was brought in, and they said, beware of that kid. He's come out of a juvie hall, and he's not right in the brain. And so I was like, okay, that's your opinion. I'm just going to figure this out. And sure enough, he had this endearing quality to him when he was not afraid. And as soon as he got afraid, he became this bully. It was like this weird transformation in this guy right in front of my face. And one of the things that made him freaked out were girls. And he was a very handsome dude, extremely built. But he wasn't right in the head. He really wasn't right in the head. And eventually, they said he killed himself by hanging himself at some mental institution or other juvie hall because he got sent out. But remember, every single day was a shitty day if this guy was around, because at least at the beginning of the school, because before the bell rang, you had to sit outside or stand outside the school, and you're meeting all your buddies and you're chatting and you're doing whatever you're doing. And this kid would always gravitate to our little group, and you can't stop someone from walking up to you, right? And he'd see girls, and he was not confident with women. I don't know if any of us were, but most of us were just sucking it up, pretending like we weren't insecure about the situation. And he'd start fighting us, just randomly come up to us. And he's bigger than all of us, so it wasn't even a contest half the time. And I had dealt with a lot of bullies just before I had moved back to Kansas, so I was sort of more benign, and he never got the fear out of me that he was looking for, which almost made him more on me than in the other guys, right? But eventually learned it wasn't going to work out, and he calmed down, and we stopped standing in the same spot, sort of thing, right? But it was interesting to watch this in a small town, to watch that algorithm of this kid struggling with his world. And again, I don't think he was sane, like everybody said, unfortunately. But now you have the internet bringing every human being on planet Earth together. And everybody knows that there's people out there that obsess on things. They obsess in a channel on the internet. They hero worship too much. They celebrity worship too much. And so they'll end up, you're just trying to make a casual comment somewhere, and they're on you. And they bully you online. And some of them get crazy if you're in a situation where it's like a Facebook. We know that there's people that have tracked people down and hurt them, even killed them. There's predators out there that go on Craigslist and they pretend to be something that they're not and convince kids to come to them, and then they hurt them and kill them. And we hear these things. So the internet has facilitated this connection between crazy and sane. And it's the result of that 1 in a million situation comes to us like it's sort of a daily thing. Maybe it is daily on a global level. With 7.5 billion people on this planet, something bad happens every single day. I think that the overwhelming majority of events in this world on on a daily basis, they're actually okay. We're actually probably pretty good to each other. But we've seen with, because let me just shift it up here before I just transition fluently. Let me shift you up. We have fears of each other sitting in a small town without anyone helping us have a psychosis. And then the next level up is someone tells you that someone else is bad, and you haven't met that someone else. So you're trying to measure the credibility of the person talking to you, and then you're trying to form an opinion about someone else to try to, figure out whether or not you believe them. Like I was told that this one kid in my junior high was nuts, and he was. He wasn't probably hysterically nuts like some people thought he was, but he was dangerous enough, crazy, that he became a problem. He was physically, he could bench press about as much as the gym teacher, and that was like 8th grade, all right? Like I said in the war episode, there's people that make money off war, and there's people that gain power by making money. And so it's in their best interest to exacerbate the differences between us. And then there's the opposite force, which is you're not allowed to have a difference. You're not allowed to think a contradictory thought towards another human being, meaning I don't like you. Now, we've got a bunch of us acting stupid in the world because they were convinced that other people are bad when we're not, One of the most revealing things that you can see in today's society is that the military-industrial complex and all military complexes in first world countries, and even some third world countries, they gain a lot of power over their people by exacerbating fear of other cultures, which is called xenophobia, right, with an X, E-N-O. Xenophobia is, the fear of the unknown. It's the fear of other cultures, etc., etc. All right. Our military industrial complex is trying to get a bunch of Christians to fear Muslims. And they also, we believe on MK Ultra, that they contribute to massacres or orchestrate them and kill a bunch of people. And they say, look, there's the reason why you need to get your kids into this war machine and die for us to get more control over oil, so the people at the top get more control over their money and thus more power over you, which will turn into some crazy THX 1138 society. The double speak you're getting from the United States government and a lot of European governments, if you're in Europe, you're just going to be like, I'm preaching to the choir if you made it this far. You have your governments telling you, no, we're going to take in a bunch of immigrants from these areas that you're supposed to be so utterly in fear of your life because they exist, that you're shoveling your kids over under this pretense that if we don't kill them first in their home country, then they're going to come over here and kill us. Remember, that was the big deal in 2003. It was better we kill them over there and them come over here. Okay, well, now your government's importing them by the metric ton. The President of the United States is running around right now trying to tell everybody that they're safe. That it's okay to bring in all these terrorist cells. Again, if you use their official story about how these individuals work, you have people with no paperwork about where they're from. They're all males. They're all military age, right? They can smuggle themselves in as Latin Americans, Hispanics from South America, and they can pretend that they're of that origin. Our Latin brothers and sisters just want to come up and work, make money, and send it back home so they can get ahead in life. But your jihadists, if they really exist, and I believe they're being bred, they're coming in to take away from the haves, right? Well, the bankers that are trying to control us, okay, they know we are the haves, and we have so much that we're able to fend them away. We're able to buy guns. We're able to buy ammo. We're able to get educated, have internet connections, see the world for what it really is, think for ourselves for at least this last fleeting decade that we're capable of doing it, right? Well, they're trying to undermine the haves in Europe. They're trying to knock down your income, knock down your education, destroy your culture, right? Merkel is a war crime of culture in Europe by saying that we need to scoop up all these immigrants, right? There's never any objective to fix the countries where they come from. And all the countries that know, that live in that area, aren't taking any immigrants because they know that's not the solution. It's strange, right? But now this anti-bullying thing comes in at the last second and says, well, if you have any, if you generate any opinions about these individuals based on the propaganda coming out of the military-industrial complex, then you're a jerk, right? Well, you can't have both. Upper echelon Illuminati people, you can't have both. You can't tell everybody that the Muslims are jihadists and they all believe in the tiny fraction of infidel passages and a tiny fraction of the Qurans, and then tell us to take them all into our backyard. But that's exactly what's going on right now. How do you do that? Are we going to assimilate them and change their opinions? No. They're marching around the streets of London, Paris, Munich, Hanover, and they're telling people, you shouldn't drink alcohol. You shouldn't, in some cases, eat meat. You shouldn't show your ankles if you're a female. You need to be like us. They're marching around and they're shooting videos of them doing this. I just saw a video yesterday. I believe it was May 2013. There was some Muslims that hung out outside of a gay nightclub, and they simply just chased people down and murdered them as soon as they walked out of the nightclub. And the whole thing's on video. You can watch these guys beat up a dude and shoot him with the gun until he was dead. This is the level of assimilation that they're expecting, which is you assimilate to their standard, not the other way around. It's weird, right? But they want us docile. They want us complicit. Now, they want it to be illegal for you to have a thought that differs from the majority. The majority / mob rules mindset has never been built out of intellectual thinking people. The majority has always been the undereducated, for whatever reason, the undereducated, knee-jerking, scapegoating fragment of society. And it's a majority fragment. Remember, 51% is the majority of 100%. And I think we have more than 51% of idiots on this planet that are manipulated by everything they say on the news. You know, when you're a moron, what's interesting about it is that you wake up every day understanding you're a moron. Or if you don't think you're a moron and you are one, then you feel sort of doubly justified in any thought that goes through your brain. Well, we have to do this, right? These evangelists that come to my front door and try to get me to believe in Jesus, man, there is no question in their mind from the indoctrination that they've been given since birth that what they're preaching to me is the way. There is no other way, you know? I never can understand how they, all these folks are so sure about themselves, but they can actually wake up every day in a society where they have to integrate with people that are very different than them. How does that happen? How do they not? Why are they worried about me liking Christ when they've got a bunch of people that don't believe him at all, who are supposedly, if you believe all the news, killing and bombing and destroying everything? Why isn't there? Why aren't they overseas in the Middle Eastern countries? Why aren't they at immigration outposts where they are depots, where they're converting everyone who comes in the country who's different than them? Don't need to worry about your Latin Americans. They're very Christian. Why aren't the Christians running around chasing every jihadist instead of a white guy sitting in some house in Huntington Beach? What do they care, right? But here's the thing. We have assault charges that can be filed against anyone who assaults you. We have battery charges that protect you from being bludgeoned with a fist or a weapon or being physically attacked. We have how many degrees of murder you can create based on the pretense of why you murdered somebody? Common law, right? Whole world is under common law. Everyone, no matter what your culture is, they know that you shouldn't kill somebody. They just know. All right. So why do we need anything else to regulate? Now we just need to be in a world for another 1,000 years or so while we average the frequency of thought up, using the internet as a tool to balance out our opinions of each other. Because no longer can we just hide in our geographical area and ignore the rest of the world. You know, it wasn't, you know, it ebbed and flowed back in the past where you had a faction that could, you know, myopically focus on their geographical area until another Genghis Khan came around or Alexander the Great to mess with your world, or some crazy religious crusade that came through town, right? But political correctness, I think, disgusts most people. And I think that your ignorant majority doesn't wake up with a clear defined internal value system to themselves. I'm always saying that, but it's like, imagine you wake up and you can't find any value in yourself. Well, then what do? You go and you co-opt someone else's agenda for yourself. You become a climate change moron. You never study how much CO2 is in the atmosphere. You never study the fact that there's more oxygen on the surface of the sun than CO2 in the greenhouse gas layer. But you're running around calling people, climate deniers, and it's likened to the Holocaust. Yeah, those are one and the same, right? All these differences are based on a difference between the haves and the have-nots in the mind of man. I don't know why any straight guy cares about if a gay guy exists. Look at the math of the situation. All right, you're a straight guy, which means you like women. Now, if you're looking at a gay man, then you're looking at someone who is out of the game. You now have more women at your disposal because there's a gay guy in the world. All right, so there you go. You can just relax a little bit. Yeah, you're not going to be one to want to see two guys make out because it's not your game. I have that feeling too, but I'm not going to run over to that couple and go, you shouldn't do that. It's just not something I'm accustomed to. Whatever, right? They're not hurting me, right? So I don't understand that. But when it comes to someone co-opting an agenda, right? We have this huge problem on our hands because we have people that have been scared into thinking that something is going to be the doomsday device to their life. Again, this whole CO2 warming the atmosphere, it's not in the atmosphere. It's not in there. It's less than 540th of a single percent, and that's including volcanoes and everything. I'm going to repeat that a little bit in my episodes because it's starting to become a ludicrous agenda. Paris just signed a climate change treaty. They're bullying the rest of the world for doing some math. When they're the ones creating nuclear power plants to replace coal plants, creating toxic water that takes 9 million years to be cleansed naturally. And they're burying it in the middle of the deserts where deserts are starting to have earthquakes. Okay, so we have a little earthquake where there's an undisclosed bunker of this water, and it pollutes the water mantle of America. All right, well then we're all doomed. America would be doomed. It'd be uninhabitable. You'd have to take all the water out of the ground and run it through some mechanism that would disassemble its atomic matter down to a stable form of itself in order to clean it all up. Imagine that. You couldn't drink water. You couldn't drink water unless you not only desalinated the stuff, but you had to, inoculate the stuff to the point where it's actually safe. You have to, fusion it apart or fission it apart and fusion it back together. Something like that. I'm not sure how the system works. They do have the machines, but it takes a tremendous amount of energy to run those machines. So then what do? Burn coal? Do you use hydroelectric? No one is choosing the power mechanisms in this world, but we're paying the price through bullies running around pointing fingers, right? I like the way that, and this is going to be, I'm being sarcastic here, right? Hitler is usually referenced when you see a leader behaving like Hitler. And so when people didn't like George Bush, he was Hitler. When they didn't like Obama, they called him Hitler. And when they don't like Trump today, they call him Hitler. Well, a few of these guys have actually behaved like Hitler. I mean, really, super duper behaved like Hitler, right? One of the first executive orders that Obama passed was to seal the records of his past. And then they passed out this bogus birth certificate that anybody with a right mind who doesn't have a predetermined agenda about what that birth certificate means could just look at it and go, oh, this is totally fake. I pulled apart the layered PDF that came out of the White House when it was released that morning. Every single signature that needed to be swapped out was a separate layer. Every single digit at the end of a series of digits that needed to be changed so it wouldn't match one that's on paper was a different layer. The background of the birth certificate itself, which is supposed to be a book that was laid down on a scanner and scanned, was pixel perfect, vertical and horizontal, which means it was made in a computer. You can't have it both ways, man. But what they'll do is they'll drum up this bullying, anti-bullying thing, so that if you ever try to fight back against things that are actually bullying, you're a criminal. We know that on average, common law protects us from being killed. But if someone's got drones flying in the sky and they simply say that you're a resisting force, and, they can, I'm sitting in the middle of a backyard, right? At no point in the history of America that I'm aware of has a bomb been dropped, from an American plane down to American soil to kill a human being. I'm unaware of that ever occurring. Maybe it has, but I don't know, okay? But I assure you what's possible. Through bullying being the substrate of conformity, bullying you into conforming, if for whatever reason a sortie went over my house and a 20,000-pound bunker buster hit me right now and killed the living shit out of me, left a 30-foot crater, blew up all the houses in this area, the only thing that would need to occur to completely whitewash a horrific violation of civil rights and sovereignty in this country would be all the press, Fox, CNN, BBC, all these bought-off Reuters AP organizations saying that somehow I was a huge terrorist, and they're going to synthesize all this crap on Facebook, which my Facebooks are empty now, but they'd synthesize all this stuff up on Facebook and social media. Probably you can create me a Twitter account, which I don't have, or Instagram account that I don't have, and say, look at all these jihadist things he was saying. Oh, they'll go into my house and they'd find all this bullshit that they planted in my house. And eventually, this horrific moment in history, especially through bullying, since we've accepted it, right, would cleanse this moment. It would cleanse a moment of horrific history, of the violation of our civil rights, right? So that's the flip side, negativity. And that's an extreme case, but that would work. You absolutely know that would work. Oh, sure, there'd be your folks that would never believe it, but they'd be powerless to do anything. And why would they be powerless to do anything? It's not really true, but they'd feel powerless because the majority of morons in this planet that take agendas and move it forward would be sitting at some bar somewhere. Well, that guy was a terrorist. He made all them deep thoughts, and he was talking about, people being bad in the world when we're all good. So bullying is a scary, scary thing. Political correctness is a form of bullying. Political correctness is a form of thought police. And political correctness is the opposite of free speech. And I watched something the other day, and I can't remember where I saw it on the net, but there are factions out there saying that we have to increase political correctness as a force to stop people from being offended. And today, as you know, there's this subspecies of mankind trying to get things for free by simply saying that what has been said to them is offensive. And as soon as you can say you've been offended, oh my God, there come the prizes, right? There come the free trip to Hawaii. There comes, all these concessions. Well, I'm so sorry. And now it's infecting the fabric of families. How many times have you heard the line, how dare you, right? Once you hear, how dare you, you're talking to someone who's a victim out of thin air, all right, who is getting offended, who is trying to turn the tables on you. That statement is trying to turn the tables of them losing an argument to them winning an argument, and their pretense for winning is simply to express to you that they've been offended. I've had friends of mine, even girlfriends of mine at times, that have done unbelievable things within the relationship that are just hands down horrible things, right? And the second I would mention what they had done, they didn't think I knew, and then I would find out. You can assert what those things might be, and you'd probably be correct. But the second I would mention these things, they tolerate it for a little bit, for a couple sentences. But the second they realize they've been pinned down, and they're going to have to maybe change their ways or make an apology of any kind, right? Usually for me, I said, I don't, I would like to hear an apology, but for me, what I really want to know is you're just going to stop what you're doing. Just don't do it anymore. We all make mistakes. It's cool. And I'm pretty lenient that way, more so than anybody I know. But they would try to flip the tables. And I see it all the time now, Being a victim is sort of like an alternate form of employment these days. I've seen a situation where a person came into a job, lied about their qualifications, eventually failed at what they did because they didn't know how to do it. And as soon as they started to get evaluated for their job and got actually let go, they went ahead and claimed whatever they could claim. It was unrelated to their performance. It was related to attributes that people always throw up in the face of employers. And that created a citation within the company. Their insurance for employees went up, and they weren't in the wrong. And the person went to another company, and we heard that they just continued to fail and fail and fail because they didn't have the qualifications. Again, they're a victim. They're using victimization as a mechanism to get away from getting qualifications to do what they do. And what was funny was, in this one particular case, this employee's father came to the place of employment. This wasn't where I worked, but the person I was dating dealt with this, and the father came to the job and said, I know my kid is unbelievably talented at this, and how dare you say she wasn't qualified? And there we saw this where it was built up. Daddy had made child believe that they were unbelievably qualified with no degree in exactly what this child was doing for a living, and tried to bully the kid back into employment. They didn't give. The kid went off to other places, and I think eventually left the industry because they didn't have the skills. I find that it is a very common thread with the parents that overcoddle, right? The parents that overcoddle can give their kid this belief in themselves that is sort of unrealistic, and then it becomes exceptionally difficult to fix the problem. Because the kid is, it's good to give kid some confidence, but it's really a disservice to them when they fail to say, you did great and just everything you do is great, great, great. Instead of saying, hey, that was actually a lot better than your last time, but let's see if you can't make it even better. You'll be more excited, I'll be more excited. Let's make sure you're better. Because, the people out there in the world that do what you do, they're really, really good. You don't have to say they're better than your kid to your kid's face, but just say, if a kid wants to be an illustrator, for instance, well, it's pretty easy to go on the internet and pull up other illustrations and say, you see how good these kids are? I know you can get this good. I know you can. You just got to do what they did. Watch my episode on talent. Get in there and hunker down and just realize every time you illustrate, unless you're tired because you've been illustrating all day, you'll get better. It's just a mathematical reality to life, right? So you feel me. This is probably turning into an episode way longer than it needs to be. But bullying is this multi-dimensional problem. It becomes a mechanism for people to deal with their inequities. It becomes a mechanism to deal with the unknown. I dated someone who was extremely religious, and when someone's extremely religious, you usually get two pitches, and I would never date one of the pitches. And one of the pitches is you have to believe everything that I believe, otherwise we can't be together. And I just say, okay, let's be friends. But what I found was that this individual realized that she really had done no research in life on this stuff, just was raised in it, kept it, and was more fanatical about this stuff than anyone in her family, right? And so she sort of let it take a back seat. I even think she stopped going to church as often, which was not something I would ever want her to do. But what ends up happening is they always seem to come back to the way they were before you met them. Everybody does this, right? So if they were one way, unless they really had a disability that they don't like, if somebody was a heavy drinker and they're like, I was drinking because I was alone, and now I'm with you, and hey, it seems like I no longer need to do this. And that was just a short stint in my life anyway, where I was in a self-pity, parade, and it's all kind of boiled off. I don't really know anybody who's done that, but I'm sure that happens, right? But this person got to the point where she tried to turn it all back on and push it in my face. And when I say push it in my face, it was sort of a thought police bullying technique. This is a sweet person. This is a person who believes in sweet things, right? Sort of. God's this wrathful child, but regardless, right? She doesn't really believe that. She believes everything was for a purpose, and so in her mind, God's not bad, right? But it turned into the passive aggressiveness where if I didn't believe, the subject of my immortal soul going off to some fire and brimstone place would be brought up in so many words, right? Not that specific, but it was sort of like, well, I know it's all right, and I'm with the majority of the sheep, of the idiots, of the morons, of the deer eyes. So because there's more of us and less of you, we must be right. And that absolves this person of ever doing any research at anything. I even heard, I was told, I kind of shared my experience with the whole thing. And it came down to just very briefly, and I don't try to preach to people their thing, but if someone's going to talk to me, I'm not going to hold back all my knowledge, especially if I'm in a close relationship with someone. I ended up telling her, I said, I look for the proof of Christ, and I finally found corresponding history where this kind of story archetype had been told. When I wrote this movie, Kukulkan, I saw it 2,500 years before Christ existed, da-da-da-da. So I pinned this girl down with some science and some history, and obviously there's a fear moment there. There's a fear moment. Oh my God, have I lived my whole life for the wrong thing? And so she searched in her head, and she goes, oh, well, you know what? In my apartment complex, I met this guy who's, she didn't remember what to call him, but he was an anthropologist, and he supposedly started out a very secular guy and went to go prove it all wrong, and said that he found all the evidence at a pool conversation with her. Excuse me. He didn't find the evidence in the pool. Finally, I met this dude. Turns out the guy was this girl is utterly gorgeous, and of course guys want to date her, right? This guy was this completely geeky dude. In terms of visual compatibility between the two of them, she was way out of his league, and she wasn't going to date a guy like this. But he was essentially, what I believe, was telling her whatever the hell she wanted to hear to make her feel good, to get closer to her, potentially date her. And of course that didn't pan out. Then he became this weird little stalker. It was kind of weird. So I've bullying is this crazy thing. Before my camera got cut off, I'll recount this thing, which is it creates a doublespeak in the brain. It makes you think one thing that you know is true, even if it's just an impression of something, right? It's a big maybe. Hey, maybe is always potentially true. But because of the pressure on your soul from the rest of society, and you want to get along with the tribe, right? The tribe is important to us. If we get kicked out of the tribe, we could find ourselves without anyone to defend us against the bully. The real physical bully is going to pound you over the head and kill you because you have something he wants, or he just wants you out of the way. And so we want to stay in the tribe no matter what. So bullying has this built-in pretense of conformity. And so we all have it in us to give up, to join them, as they always say, right? And that's why the internet has actually allowed those of us who are thinking for ourselves to pile up in these groups like MK Ultra Radio. We're all together. We don't agree on probably the majority of things, except that things are not the way that we're told that they are. But that's a group that's worth being in, because we're living in the dynamic potential of reality. And all we want in the world is for everything to be good and positive. And that's really what all the bullying usually wants as well. People who believe in climate change, well, they're just trying to clean up the environment. That's fine. They should stop trying to say that it's climate change, and they should just say we want CO2, regardless if it warms the earth. We just want things not to barf out carbon. Hey, man, who can't get behind that? We want to get off oil. We want to get off nuclear power, coal power. We want zero-point energy systems like Nikola Tesla created. That's what we really want, right? But as you look at the internet, and this is really for those of you who comment in forums, you comment on YouTube posts, be aware that we do spend billions of dollars in the United States to pay an organization to bully everyone. It's just the truth. It's unfortunate. There are agendas behind all bullying, and because people usurp agendas to give themselves a sense of purpose, their infectious lunacy grows. I'm hoping, if nothing else, you'll recognize the pattern now of habitual victims who are trying to bully you into giving them something if you can just be convinced that you offended them. I'm gonna say, probably to the day I die, adults don't get offended. Children do. Adults just pity those who happen to be in the bullying state of mind. It doesn't mean it's not frustrating, but being frustrated is not being offended necessarily. Offended is a really advanced concept that's being sort of taught to humanity. You have the right to be offended. And after that, you have a right to a reward from those who offended you. And if they won't capitulate, surrender, and join your group, well, then we're going to liken them to the Holocaust, and we're going to put them in jail. We're going to assassinate them. How many politicians have come out and tried to grab a few voters by saying, well, those who deny climate change, they should be herded up and killed? It's said every single month by some other douchebag out there, right? Forget science. Forget the fact that CO2 doesn't touch the atmosphere in terms of warming. Forget that whole thing. Oh, and don't worry about these planes that create all these white trails in the sky. Regardless of what they are and what they do, it's particulate we're breathing. As soon as they spray, everybody gets sick. It's crazy. They just sprayed the crap out of us for 3 or 4 days straight. Today it's perfectly clear, right? It's colder up in there right now than it has been all year. It was 35 degrees when I woke up in Southern California. It's 3 degrees from freezing, but all of a sudden, all these jets flying over my head aren't creating any contrails at all. Not even a tiny one. Well, yesterday it was like, I guess 2 days ago, before it rained, it was horrific, And I went to work, and all these people are sick. All sick. Upper respiratory problems. All at the same time. You might think they're passing it to each other, but everywhere they spray, everybody gets sick. Even if there's a hermit sitting at home writing a novel, as long as he goes out on his balcony, sucks down a few clouds. Well, if he's not taking his vitamin C, his zinc, copper pills, and eating right, you catch whatever's going around. You may not be catching it from the clouds, but your immune system's trying to digest all these particulates. And so it's fighting things that aren't the flu, fighting things that aren't the cold. And so you get the cold, you get the flu, you get whatever's going around. And some of you don't get sick, and it's probably because you're paying attention to your health. It's a good thing. But I'm digressing. Maybe all of us bully a little bit. I don't know. Maybe I'm being a bully and pushing a lot of the concepts that I push. I do try my very best to base it on science that all of you can look up within seconds. But I know I fail. I quote things wrong all the time. I say stupid things by accident all the time. The day I corrected myself in the video. You're going to see the flat Earth one come up here. I actually quoted a mile at 5,280 miles. That was the distance in a mile. I meant feet, and I actually said feet, but I accidentally edited out my correction. So I make mistakes all the time, right? What I'm doing online now is if I see someone trying to be a victim, I call them out. And I'm probably not the most polite person at it, but I'm not trying to bully them in my own way. I'm just trying to say, look at what you're doing. Look at what you're doing. You're trying to be a victim. And there's all these victim groups out there right now. Oh my God. We have laws on books in Europe that you can't question certain things in history. Otherwise you go to prison forever. What is that? I mean, we really want a world where we have history and laws? You can't question history? Even if you want to ingest one atom in history, well, that's illegal. It's illegal for you to even bring up the concept that we would analyze with better information, with better history, with more admissions and deathbed confessions and finding, blatant evidence about things being impossible. We're unable to go and question certain things because there's bully organizations out there that are quite successful scaring the sheep into the pasture, right? I think I'll just end it here because I'm just going on and on and on. Some of these deep thoughts are going to be good. Some of them are going to suck. I don't intend to make ones that suck. And again, once I think I make ones that suck, people are like, oh, that's the greatest one you've ever made. So this might be one of those because I don't have a tremendously strong feeling about it. I know this is a concept we all struggle with. And we're all frustrated. We're all tired of being bullied ourselves by bullies that are trying to stop bullying. It's just weird, right? There are people out there that don't like you. And they may be stupid for not liking you, but whatever. Let them be. Let them at least show their colors to you, right? Malcolm X said, look, I'd rather have you come up to me and call me the N-word so that I know you're a racist than go behind my back and use the N-word, but greet me with equality in your tone. I want to know who you really are so I know where my enemies are and where my allies really are, There's a lot of, There's a lot of people out there that spend a lot of time online trying to bully people into trains of thought. And all I'm going to tell you is by coming at it from a bullying standpoint, you're galvanizing and freezing their brain in that bullying mechanism because they don't want to be told such a thing. Let them make a mistake like I made, right? Let them call somebody a name or use a derogatory word right next to someone they really like, and then find out that that person is in the classification of the word they used, and just regret it for the rest of their lives, right? I said earlier, the faggot bomb in front of this gay guy when I was about 21, and a moron. I tried to find that guy at one point. And my girlfriend at the time, who now is just a friend of mine, I said, well, do you know who this guy is? You know, this is where he lived, and he lived with a friend of yours, and do you know where he is? And she said, no, but don't worry about it. He was cool. And I know he was cool with it in the end, but I just wanted to extend an apology for being a moron, and I've been unable to do it. I probably will die being unable to do it. But guess what? That's a little stake in my brain that says, watch what you say, think before you speak, on everything, right? And I've been pretty grumpy in some of these videos, right? But I'm hopefully not bullying. I'm hopefully just expressing a frustration. But I know I probably have, for sure, right? So it's a day-to-day battle until we all homogenize and we become gray aliens with almond eyes in this world because we crossbred so much. There's only one culture, one race, and one form of thought. But I have to say, even if we all turn into gray aliens and we're all one race and one culture, there's going to be something else that divides us, Well, you get to live in the warm, beachy area of the world, and you have to live, I have to live up in the Arctic where it's freezing to death. I have to build igloos. Well, I want to take what you have. Like I said actually, I'm not sure it ever came. I made 3 episodes I lost. 3. In fact, one of them was almost 2 hours, and I lost it because I forgot to plug in my mic over there. How ridiculous is that? But in a couple of these episodes, I said, I think there's a psychosis with weather, that the whole world believes that they should have 72-degree weather constantly. Whatever the best weather is in the world, there's some idiots out there that I've talked to that no longer like the way that the weather is in their area, even though their weather has been exactly that way since the poles shifted and temperate zones or whatever they are. But this internet has given us this feeling of entitlement to everyone else's have, And again, if you don't have what you want as a built-in value mechanism in your own life, you're going to project and try to find things that you can get, We just can't let it devolve down to this bullying thing. That can't be a technique that we use. I know you know what I'm saying. All right. Well, if you haven't gone to mkulturaradio.com, that's where everything is. That's all I'm going to say. I guess we can all just do what we can, And I think that's the moral of this story. I don't know if there's any quick, fast solutions to any of this stuff, but it's a psychosis we're all dealing with. Either we're doing it ourselves inadvertently, or we're doing it on purpose, or we're the victim in the inverse to the same proportions. Let's go out and be happy today. Let's do something good. Let's go give to somebody. Let's erode down these differences that we think we have, We don't have to make a socialistic society where we hand out our money to everybody and lose our accomplishments. But maybe just a kind voice here and there, or some understanding voice. If you feel like you're going back into the traditional thing where you've allowed yourself to be, quote unquote, offended, have pity on them. And, when there's a difference between you and the person you're talking to, whether it be online or in face-to-face, just understand that they're of that age and of that time in their life where they may actually change their mind. Or maybe if they're 80 years old, well, then, they're going to punch their ticket, and that's the way they're going to be. And you're never going to change them. So why waste your energy and your time in your life trying to change them? I think the good news is that a lot of this is with young people. And I think that we're all going to calm down over time. I used to be really militant about my thoughts in the 20s and 30s, and now I've really calmed down. And I've realized that I've wasted a lot of my life getting involved with these conversations and losing friends here and there. Not many, but, probably more online than anything, right? Getting unfriended. That's what happens today, right? Sometimes it's the greatest thing that ever happened to you. Anyway, go take care of yourself and somebody else, and I will see you in the next really bizarre, segmented, meandering Deep Thoughts. Over now.